All right, Ecclesiastes 7, verse 23. Let's just go ahead and read down through 29. 7:23 to 29. Who will grab that for us? Charles.
Many times also your heart has known that even you have cursed others.
Ecclesiastes 7:23 down to 29.
7:22.
23.
22?
23.
Oh, 23. Okay. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Here's what I have found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly, this is only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes.
Okay. So question number 5 on this lesson pertaining to 23 to 25, I had asked, what was the result of Solomon's search for wisdom by his own efforts? It says in 23, I said I will be wise, but what? But it's far from me. Now, who is it that's saying this? Solomon, who is?
The wisest man to live beside Jesus.
Yeah, the wisest man to live besides our Lord. So, you think about how authoritative, if you will, that statement is. You know, as we get older, I think we realize there's more we don't know. Whereas young people tend to have a view of, well, I know so much, I know things. But then you go through life, some of its trials, difficulties, and things, and you realize, well, I really don't know as much as I thought I did. And here's Solomon saying, went after wisdom, but, you know, I can still see it's so far from me.
Well, basically what he did was confirm things that already existed by learning about them. He understood them, how they work. But none of that was in the future. That was already done. It was there for him to discover and learn. But then, when he's past that, when he's seeking more than that, he cannot know.
And
It's the unknown that he can't discover. He may discover some of the unknown, but he will never have all knowledge of the unknown.
yeah, there's no way he can see down into the future and events unfolding. And even watching events unfold and sometimes looking back, he couldn't figure out why these things were happening. He didn't have that knowledge, that insight into God's providence. And that's, of course, a big theme through here, and we're going to continue to see this. But he could not explain why everything was happening that was happening. And you think about this, he had to be inspired to write the wisdom literature. Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Solomon. That was by inspiration. Now, I don't discount that there is his knowledge involved in that, just as there would be Paul's knowledge involved in various things, Peter and so on, using men as they were, who they were, to reveal God's message. But this is still the inspired message. We don't want to fall into the trap of Ecclesiastes is just a man's book of wisdom. It's not. It's beyond even Solomon. Because these are the words of the Holy Spirit that are being given to us through him. So he had to be inspired for that, and he simply is acknowledging, as much as I've gone after wisdom, I still don't know it all. I still can't understand it all. I'm not achieving that. And so it's something that you and I are not going to be able to achieve. Looking out into this world and figuring things out and coming to this level of knowledge that, if you will, makes us superhuman or extra human knowledgeable or whatever it might be. So question number 6, I had asked, what was worse than death for Solomon? Okay, deceitful woman. What is that? What your translation says? Mine doesn't use the word deceitful.
Or bitter.
Her heart is a snare, a net to trap a man. It's like a spider web to trap other animals. A woman uses her attraction to deceive a man into.
Any other thoughts there? Nancy?
One translation I read said wicked,
Okay.
but basically it's a woman who is ungodly, who will trap an ungodly man, a man whose heart is not toward the Lord. And a man whose heart is toward the Lord will escape that because he won't be drawn in by that. But if you're not keeping your heart toward the Lord, you can be snared by that.
Right. Over in the book of Proverbs, really the first, quarter or third of Proverbs is pretty well devoted to this theme right here about do not go down that path, do not look at a woman, do not lust after a woman, do not go toward them, because there are those out there who will ensnare you, entrap you, and wreak havoc in your life because you've given in to that. And so here he's bringing this out. There's a lot of things I don't know, but I'll tell you what I do know. And there is a woman that's worse than death, and she gets her fetters on you, she gets a hold of you, and it's going to be a problem for you. But if you please God, as Nancy was saying, you keep your heart and mind focused on God, you're seeking to honor Him in your life, that's not going to be a trap for you. You're going to be okay. So keep your mind, your heart focused there. Now, 27 to 29 is an interesting section here, and sometimes people maybe scratch their head about exactly what he's saying here. But he says, verse 28 in particular, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Thinking about finding out the reason of things and wisdom and understanding. What about that? He says 1 in 1,000. What's the percentage on that for you math whizzes?
0.1.
Do what? 0.1. 1/10 of 1%, right? So what's he saying about wisdom among men? It's extremely rare. Very rare. Okay. Anybody who works in the workplace, it's rare. There are challenges of getting people who are wise, who are patient, who make good decisions, have good judgment. That's a challenge to find people like that. It seems that there's always a little something missing there. But he's using this, and I would grant this is hyperbole, but he's saying, hey, this is a problem in the world, something that I've seen, and so don't expect that this is going to be like everywhere, wisdom everywhere. It's not going to be out there. So what does he then bounce that off of? He compares it to, 1 in 1,000 men, but haven't seen it among women. Okay, now is Solomon a chauvinist? What Why would he maybe use that number 1,000? I know it's like a complete number, it's a full number, but is there anything else we read about him and 1,000 women?
Well, he evidently had a weakness for bad women, if you will, because of the way his wives and concubines led him away from God. So it's probably a truthful statement, but the problem lies with Solomon and the type of woman he was looking for and where he was looking for his women with a foreign country.
What did he have been ensnared by? He says, I know this. There's more than one time Solomon had been ensnared by women, right? And now he's coming back and saying, look, there's men, and there's really rarity of wisdom among men, and among 1,000 women, haven't seen. And you could literally look at that as his 700 wives, 300 concubines. He's saying, it's not there. And all he's saying altogether is, it's rare to find wisdom, to find people who are truly dedicated to God, that are steadfast in doing His will. You know, Solomon himself had fallen away. He was surrounded by people who facilitated, helped him out in falling away from the Lord. So there's not that wisdom out there that's to be seen very much, if you will. Any other thoughts there?
Well, I think he answers the question in the next verse, is that God made man upright, but when he says man, I think he means mankind.
Yes.
They seek out things other than God, and that's the problem.
Exactly. Exactly right. So he comes back on that. You know, when we come into this world, and originally when man was made, but when we each come into this world, we are upright. We are pure. And over time, we become corrupt. Mike?
Yeah, studying this, I think what he was saying was, out of the whole of mankind, I have found one that is righteous. Now, I believe that he probably understood the promises made to Abraham and the promises made to David. And so I think it's more of a messianic type of prophecy, so to speak, is that there's one that is righteous among all of them. Because when we look at that word 1,000, it means complete, the whole. I think that pointed that out. That's just kind of how I've understood this and kind of reconciled in my head what he's stating here. Either way, what he's saying is it's a rare thing. So it's, when you look at all of mankind, one stands out.
Right. I've never understood it that way. Just simply from the standpoint of this is rare, comparing men and women, either group, it's a challenge, but God's made man upright. Speaking of that mankind, as John referenced there. Let's jump into chapter 8 now, and hopefully we can plow through and finish this chapter up. But chapter 8, verses 1 through 8. Who will read that for us? Chapter 8, 1 through 8.
Who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the strictness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful. And a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment, because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There is no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it.
Okay. So through this section, he's talking about this relationship to rulers for the most part. And in verse 1, asking that question, who is like a wise man and who knows the interpretation of a thing? He's still going down through this thing, you know, who can look at life and discern and interpret the events of life? Who do we have in our modern society that tries to interpret events?
Fortune tellers, you say.
Okay, there can be fortune tellers.
Weatherman.
Okay, weathermen. Most are really bad. Some are really good. What's that? Media. Turn on your television, pop open the internet, and boy, oh boy, are there a lot of people out there telling you exactly the way things are, and then you hear something completely different, completely opposite. So, yeah, we have a lot of media, a lot of talking heads. Who else?
Politicians.
Politicians do. Yeah, and politicians' media, that line's a little blurred sometimes.
Yes, I was going to say the same.
Okay.
Politicians and even those that are judges or seeking to be federal judges, and the amount of conjecture and speculation that we now see was previously unheard of.
Right. A lot more going on. This is my feeling. This is the way I think it should be, as opposed to here's the law. Right? Yeah, exactly. We have sociologists, we have philosophers, we've had 2 years of scientists who have utterly botched the reality of the situation. There are so many different experts, so-called, in our society, that you listen to that, you get confused, you don't know who to believe, you get anxious, which, by the way, the media's job, in case everyone doesn't know, the media's job is to get you anxious so you keep watching them so they can tell you what to be anxious about next, and we're going to inform you. So Solomon's looking at this saying, who knows the interpretation of a thing? Who can give us specifics and tell us exactly, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, 2 years later, oh, we're still dealing with it. See, they had no clue. No clue. And those are supposed to be really educated leading lights. You look at people passing laws and economy and taxes, and they say, well, it's going to do this, it's going to have that effect, it's going to have the other effect. And so many times they're just dead wrong. They don't know for sure what's going to happen. So, wisdom is a blessing to a man. As he says here, wisdom makes his face shine. That's the idea of, it makes his countenance well, gives him a good countenance. And wisdom can help him navigate difficult times. But to be able to interpret things very accurately, that's beyond men to be able to do. Because again, in part he's talking about the providence of God. Now, keep that in the back of your mind as we jump into verses 2 through 8 here. Verses 2 through 8, 2 and 3, he says what, essentially?
Obey your leaders.
Okay, obey your leaders. Anything else in there? Keep their commandments. What? Verse 3 kind of dials this in a little bit for us. Keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God, so you have a relationship to God that supersedes and governs. It informs your relationships with those who are in power. Your relationship to God is primary over that. But God says, listen to the powers that be. But verse 3 says what?
Don't hastily leave his authority. Don't run away from that too quick.
Yeah, and ESV, exactly what does it say there?
That's verse 3.
Yes.
Be not hasty to go from his presence.
Okay, and from his presence, this has very direct application to someone who's serving and working with a king. Now, it's true generally, we have responsibilities, 1 Peter chapter 3, Romans chapter 13, there are governing authorities. We need to submit to those, respect those, be law-abiding citizens. Here, he gives a little bit of the flavor of, you're there in his presence. Don't be hasty to go out from his presence. Don't be hasty to get upset with what he said or what he's directed or what he's told you to do, and you just, I'm done. I'm out of here. So be careful about that. don't take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. The king's the one sitting in power, sitting in control. He has the authority. Don't be quick to rebel against that king. Be willing to endure some suffering, some hardship, some things that maybe are not so pleasing to you, but you need to have a respect for him. And he says, verse 4, where the word of a king is, there's power, and who may say to him, what are you doing? So when you think about a king, a monarch, who is it that just goes up to the monarch and says, what do you think you're doing? What happened to some people who do that?
Beheaded.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't last long. They don't last long. So he's looking at this idea of you have someone in authority, respect that authority, be willing to go along with it. He who keeps his commandment will experience nothing harmful. What's the principle there? Verse 5. Question number 1 on that lesson. What will happen if we are good citizens?
Government's not interested in throwing you in jail or anything like that. When you're kind of going with the flow, that's what they need, that's what they want.
Yeah, that is what they want. Exactly right. And so he says, look, you're acting as a good citizen, you're hearing that, you're abiding within what he has commanded, what he has decreed, if you will, then it's going to be okay. You know, nothing harmful will come to you. Wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. He comes back, and essentially what he's saying there is, you know, before he said, don't be hasty to go out, don't take your stand for an evil thing. And here, in part of what he's saying is, you know, there's a time and there's a place to speak up. There's a time and a place to say, wait a minute. And verse 6, because for every matter there is a time of judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. He says, you know, you have to be smart about how you deal with the king here and what you might say to him. Any other thoughts there?
If you tie that all back into verse 1, don't you think that he's saying the wise man is going to be the one that can explain the issues of this life as it relates to eternity? And while he's doing that, he's going to himself and advise that you be obedient to the king, even though he may be unjust, God, because he knows God's in control and all are going to be judged by God. But while you're here, God has ordained those evil men, even though they're evil, they're your king. Obey them if you can, like Daniel did, like Paul did in appealing to Caesar. Do your best in relationship to eternity. And that's how the wise man is evaluating life, is in regards to eternity, not in regards to the profit of this life.
Right. And because he mentioned there, you know, you have this oath to God above all. Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say, a good example of this is David. How they go up to David, there comes a point in time where something has to be said. But as Paul said, off with your head, you know, so it took a lot of courage and a lot of wisdom and, you know, preparation.
And, you know, Samuel confronted Saul on multiple occasions. And so, yeah, there is a time and a place to confront even the king, a autocratic ruler, with, hey, this is a problem here. That you need to rethink these things. You know, you're stirring up more rebellion than you are, you know, loyalty among your people. This doesn't work here.
Solomon says it in a similar fashion in the very next chapter 10, verse 4. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. So it's could have fit that in this chapter if we wanted to. It fit perfectly in this context.
Yeah.
Our response, how we respond, might in fact, it'll be good for us, but it could even sway the guy who just got upset at you, or the guy who just directed you to do something that isn't right. The way you react might influence him too.
Mm-hmm. Right. As he looks at you and has confidence in you, you're not just some, unstable, reactionary person. You're mature and able to hold your ground and act with some decorum. Yeah. Okay. Question number 2, I'd ask: how does God limit the impact of wicked men, and what should we take from this? So, talking about this ruler that is not necessarily doing the things that are good, but what?
Ultimately,
Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, he doesn't know the future. God is in control, and he doesn't know how long he's going to be king. He may think he's going to be king for a long time, but as was established in Daniel, God rules in the kingdoms of men. And when you go back to the very first statement in this chapter, who's like a wise man? A wise man's perspective is different than a foolish man's. A foolish man goes by emotion and reaction, just like you were saying. But a wise man's perspective is based on the fact that God is in control. And even that ruler doesn't know how long he's going to rule. And even if he is evil, he may be carrying out God's will. And we can't always know that. It doesn't always look that way to us on earth.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of what he's discussed throughout here. You scratch your head at why is this happening this way, and he's going to talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, so the wise man is going to be looking long term. He's going to be looking at big picture as opposed to reacting in the moment and being swayed with everything that's unfolding or happening before him. And the king doesn't know what the future holds, and really no one knows. More to the point, you don't know what's going to happen as God works in his providence. And so verse 8, he brings it down specifically to what point?
We don't control life and death, God does.
Love the way he puts that. No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. When it's time to die, and I don't mean that in the sense of that God has an appointed day, time for everyone to die. That is not a biblical concept. But when it's time that our body, for whatever reason, is at the point to give out, we're not going to stop that. It just cannot be done, whether it's through sickness or through an accident or just simply through age. Nobody's going to prevent that. And so what's true for all men is true for the one who's sitting in power. No one has power in the day of death. There is no release from that war. We're all going to come to the grave at some point, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. So you look at this wicked person who's in power, and like Nancy said, sometimes it seems like they're going to live forever. For those of us who are old enough, for me, in my lifetime, it's like, when is Fidel Castro ever going to die? That guy, man, he hung on forever, seemed like. But eventually he died. And so whatever ruler there is out there that we may be displeased with, one way or another, they're not going to be in power one day. They will be brought down.
And they're not going to go unpunished. Talking about the vanity of life under the sun. Well, life above the sun, if we want to make the opposite, life after this, the wicked won't be unpunished. The wicked king you warred with and you stood your ground for as one in a subservient position, that evil will not go unpunished. So we get that. Proverbs 11:21, Proverbs 16:5. And at the ending of this book, the secret things, good or evil, that are going to be exposed. God is just, and there won't be vanity in that sense, in the eternal spiritual sense, because God will make it right.
Right. And really the entire book of Revelation devoted to that very theme. That those who are in power oppressing the children of God, committing extremely wicked acts against them, God's not ignorant about what's going on. Be patient. Be patient. And that's essentially what he's saying here. Be patient. Let God work things out. You do what you're supposed to do. And trust in God as these things unfold. Because eventually they will be out of power one way or another. All right, so anything through verse 8 here? Let's read 9 through 13, please. 9 through 13, who will get those for us? Fine.
All this I've seen and applied in my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. So then, I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did thus. This too is futility, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly. Therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may live in his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear Him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not live in his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God.
Okay. So, a king, verse 9, can do what in the way that he rules? Oppress? Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I was telling you what to do, ruler, and I would tell you something wrong. That would increase my punishment.
Okay, as a ruler being held accountable to God?
Yeah.
Certainly will. And there's been more than one ruler that has acted in a way that provoked rebellion, pushback from among the people. Of course, there's been plenty of rulers that have been put to death because the people just said, we're not having it anymore. You've gone way too far here. There have been countries founded because they said, we've had it. We're done. Okay, we'll handle our own business here. So they rule to their own hurt. And it is the oppression of the people. Instead of looking out for the people, shepherding the people, caring for the people, they rule in a way that comes back to bite them. That's never good. Now, do rulers have to be strong? Do they have to stand up? Do they have to make hard decisions and stick to those and lead the people in following after those things and maybe call on the people to sacrifice? Yes, yes. But he's doing it for their best interest, not in his own selfish things or following his own selfish heart, if you will. So, rulers can rule to their own hurt in various different ways. Now then, question number 3. In your own words, what is the vanity described in verse 10? Wicked's buried, come and gone from the place of holiness. They were forgotten, or some have a footnote there. They were praised in the city where they had done so. This is vanity.
All the praise and honor and glory that he received in the world was of no benefit to him at death.
It certainly wasn't a benefit of death. What he's pointing out here, though, this wicked man's buried, but he had come and gone from the place of holiness. What's that a description of?
A priest, a leader,
Wouldn't necessarily be a priest, but what's the holy place? Temple of God. He's going to worship. He's putting on this show in life of, I'm a holy man, I'm dedicated to God, but he's wicked. So he's hypocritical in his life. He lives a wicked life. And they were forgotten in that sense. It's saying his wicked deeds were forgotten in the city where he had done so. And if it's praise, it means when they buried him, they praised him and just ignored those evil deeds. Has anyone ever been like that? They lived a wicked life, but when they die, all of a sudden they were just such a good person and, wonderful, and everybody, there's nothing said about how terrible they were. It's only good things said about them.
You can go to funerals and get that all the time.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, you can get that almost any day of the week going to the funeral home. People lived a wicked life, but then there's only something good said about them. But here's the thing, this man was wicked throughout his life. He pretended like he had some type of holiness or respect for God, but he didn't. And when he's buried, it's like people all of a sudden just, we're just going to ignore everything he did. That's vanity. Why do people do that? They shouldn't do that. So then, question number 4, how should evil be dealt with? Verse 11.
Punish speedily.
Punish speedily. Why?
Well, it's what is deserved, but it also serves as a warning to others not to do that same deed. Or don't be that way.
Okay.
If it's not done swiftly, it might not get done at all.
As he just cited, this man's wicked. He goes to his grave wicked, and there's no accountability for that man. Is basically what he's saying. There's no accountability, and it's like his record's just wiped clean. So, because the sentence against evil work is not executed speedily, where does this principle apply?
I think in a justice system, it would apply for us. I think that also what is, I know that 10 and 11 probably are linked together. It's kind of talking about the same thing. But we see this a lot in our justice system. And, it just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So you have someone that just continue to do the wrong thing over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And because there's really no accountability.
They murdered 5 people in their home, and they get the death penalty, and 20, 25, 30 years later, they're executed. They used to take people like that from the courthouse out to the gallows, and that's it, you're done. And what it does is it teaches people, hey, there's a pretty good chance here that I'll get away with it. Or it's way down the line before I'm actually going to have to account for it. John?
But if you think about the righteous person, and you take those under the New Testament law, what is the result of sin? Well, it's the Son of God being put to death. That has been done, so it's been done speedily for us. Well, that gives us the reason to live a life of righteousness, because it's been done, and it was done quickly. And we see the results of sin is the death of an innocent lamb. Mm-hmm. So I think the reverse of this verse is that justice has been meted out speedily for us. It's there for us to see it. We'll see it. If we see the truth, if we see eternity, we can see the effects of sin and what happens what the results of sin is, and that's death.
Yes. In the end, there's death. Wages of sin is death, Romans 6:23. In 1 Corinthians 5, Paul warns the Corinthians about allowing a man who had his father's wife to remain in them, because he said a little leaven will leaven the whole lump. So when you're gathered together, you need to discipline him, remove him from that group. So the sentence needs to be executed speedily, because then if it's not, it'll spread. So it works in a society, it works in a congregation, and it's a general principle there.
Blessings also in the home.
In the home, right. Children who are just allowed to run amok, if you will. So exactly right. All right, question number 5 I had asked, what is the irony of 12 and 13? Sinner does evil 100 times and the days are prolonged. Yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before Him. It will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. So he says his days are prolonged, verse 12, but verse 13 says he will not prolong his days.
I think when you look at what he's talking about, the big scheme of things, and that is that you can prolong your fleeting shadow of a life. It's still a shadow. It's still something that's very short. And you can do evil 100 times, and you can, in that short time period that you have your own life, you can prolong it just a little bit longer, but in the end, it's going to catch you. And those who are righteous, it's going to be well with them. Because no matter what that fleeting shadow looks like, in the end, they have the reward after.
And what do we call that reward? Eternal life? Anything else?
Heaven.
Okay, heaven? Heaven. We sometimes refer to it as a day, an eternal day, you know. And as Mike's saying here, he's saying, look, the wicked people, yeah, you can look at them and they prolong their days and they live long lives and they can be wicked. But you know what? As someone who's trying to please God, don't let that bother you. God is going to take care of you. It's going to be well with you. It's not going to be well with the wicked. In the end, their days are not going to be prolonged. They're going to go to the grave and then they're going to be punished when they go to that grave. So they won't have the eternal day. They're going to have eternal night, if you will. And it is, as he said, a shadow of this life. Any other thoughts there?
Just a question. Do you think perhaps he's trying to make a slight distinction between a sinner and an evil man? I know I think the answer is no, just to kind of preface the question or preface your response, but the sinner is one who's not righteous. They're continually sinning. But I wonder if he's just trying to make a distinction between a sinner who's trying and still fails often versus someone who's just pure evil.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it that way. I would take it he's just switching up the language just as part of the description. All right, let's read verses 14 through 17, please. Who will grab that for us? Ron.
There is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the works of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. So I commanded enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry. For this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the works of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it.
Okay. Remember when we started the book of Ecclesiastes, I had mentioned it's written in a conversational form. He talks about one subject, goes to another, to a third or fourth, then he'll come back around maybe to the second subject. And then he'll talk about 8, 9, 10, 12 or whatever, then he'll circle back around to number 5. And here we can see he's coming back around. In this section, he is talking about still God's providence and how can a man understand that? But he comes back to this idea of the inequities in life. And we can't change that. We're not going to fix those inequities that we see in the world around us. You know, just men sometimes suffer like they're wicked. You know, Jesus numbered with the transgressors. That happens. It's just the way it is. And sometimes there are wicked men who are blessed like they're righteous. And, you know, Barabbas, right? He got off. At least that time. We don't know what happened to him afterward. But in this life under the sun, you know, things just aren't fair at times. Life is not fair. And if we have in mind, this is one of the problems with our society today, is people think everything should be fair. It's not. You just need to get a grip on that and move forward. And that's what Solomon's essentially saying here. Hey, accept the way things are and go forward. You're not going to figure out God's providence in this. If we start complaining about it, we get upset, we get angry. Now, I know there are things we see that are unjust and we want to fix them. And we want to do what's right. We want to help people who have been mistreated. That's true. But some people become very bitter, very angry, very hostile toward the world around them, and even question God and His working in this world. And we don't want to get in that position. Just understand these things happen in this life. So he says then to do what? Verse 15. Where should your focus be?
I think essentially it's telling us to enjoy the fruit of our labors, the things that we find to do in our life under the sun, to do them as we know mightily, and to recognize that these things are the blessings of God and the blessings that we have, and we need to appreciate them.
Yeah. Look what's right in front of you.
And that's contrasted with trying to figure out what's going to happen.
Right.
Don't worry about that, because you do not know what's going to happen. Instead, take care of today, what you have, and enjoy it. And be happy, be content.
Yeah, and as John is saying, when he talks about it, basically he's saying you can exhaust yourself completely in trying to come to the conclusion of all these matters, and you will not.
I apply my heart to know wisdom, see the business that is done on the earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night. Yeah. You can wear yourself out trying to figure it all out. And to what John was saying, there's something very similar in the New Testament, right? Sermon on the Mount. Deal with what you got today. Don't borrow from tomorrow's troubles. Just be content. Seek God. Seek the kingdom of God and His righteousness. That's where our focus needs to be. He's put things within our control or within our power to a degree that, as He said, eat, drink, and be merry. You have work, you have possessions, you have a family, you have things to tend to in your life. Don't get caught up in these others and wear yourself out trying to figure it out, trying to fix it all. So essentially trying to figure out God's providence will drive you mad. We're not going to do it. We put our faith and trust in Him that God is just and righteous, and He knows what He's doing, and it is for the best of everyone. All right, Lord willing, next week is singing. So 2 weeks from tonight, Lord willing, moving on into Ecclesiastes 9.